out playing with joy, and we're creating players without joy. So, I think this is an equal opportunity concern for rec players who are young, who want to stay in the game, for adult players who, after they're done and they're amateur, they want to stay in cradle to grave, and we want them to stay in their whole lives. And then those players who are the elite players. We're not creating players that have the joy that would allow them to really become top-class, world-class players. As you know, you can't you get a great player, playing robotically. So
right. Yeah, no, you're fine. And so you talked about the DA and your issues behind it. You've mentioned it in an interview with 442, and you have experience. You do have two kids that played in the DA, and you talked about some of the more ridiculous structures enforced in the DA, including the banning of the high school soccer players. So could you elaborate with with some of the solutions to the issues involved with the DA?
Sure. I mean, I definitely have my strong thoughts about that, but I do want to say, I mean, I think I know how to fix the DA, but as to, I think I know how to fix a lot of things, but as to all of these, I'm not going to come in like an autocrat. That's not what people want anymore. They want
Right.
they want people to come in, form, bring in people, form task force and committees, listen to other people as well. So what I'll tell you is my thoughts, which ultimately I will share with the committee, and we'll debate it and see if I'm right or people think I'm right. The strictures that I'm talking about, that I've lived as a DA board member and parent for 7 years, or did live for 7 years, where every half season or every season they come down with another restriction. And they were edicts coming down from Chicago, 30,000 feet in the air, devised in a boardroom, not consulting the people in the trenches. And what I mean by trenches is highest respect. I was someone in the trenches, right? Because I'm a dad of kids who play, and I'm at all these academy games, and I'm a board member. And yet all of a sudden they come in with some new rule. And all those new rules, by the way, the high school thing, I definitely want to liberalize that and relax that rule. I get the logic behind that. That's not the one that I say is I wouldn't call that utterly ridiculous. I would call it kind of un-American, because you're taking away something that's quintessentially American, a chance to play for your school, and therefore you're taking some joy away, you're sucking joy out. And when you contrast a high school game to a typical development academy game, it's starkly different. Development academy games, very, very sterile, antiseptic. The parents are tense. They don't cheer because they're so invested. If it's not the spring, if it's the fall, there are no college coaches there because they're in their season. So you've got this sterile environment. You have one USSF assessor. You got kids playing well, but there really isn't that passion. And then in a high school game, the quality is generally not as good. But the reality is these kids learn to play in front of 500 people. You might have 40 people at an academy game, and they're all parents except for the USSF assessor. And at a high school game, you can have 200, 500, or they have a night game once a year. It could be 1,000 or more. Those kids learn to play, in front of crowds, which is something that I always had difficulty in my own career, and I've seen now my older son, master that, and I think that's tremendous. The edicts getting back to the ban on high school, I don't agree with it, but I wouldn't call it utterly ridiculous. There was logic behind it. The logic was that they felt like we weren't developing quickly enough, and those 3 months you play in high school, you get comparatively inferior coaching, training, and competition. I think as a general rule, compared to the development academy, that's correct. In most cases, the development academy is higher level than high school, but you got to look at the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is taking something, quintessentially American away from a kid's experience, harms his happiness or her happiness, and it also, can even latently cause resentment for the sport that's become so demanding in their lives. So I think you suck the joy out. The other part is, again, I think you learn something from playing in front of a crowd. Now, that does dovetail into the things I think that are utterly ridiculous. And so these strictures that come from Chicago, I know, because I know the person who's involved that devised them, what they're saying sitting in that room is, oh, they're not, we're not doing well enough. Let's make them more professional. So they make these strictures that are aimed to make these kids more professional, and they're counterproductive. On paper, that might make sense, but the reality is they have a huge negative impact to the kids, and they've completely discounted, for instance, the fact that while the quality of the high school game might not be as good, the fact that you're playing in front of 500 people as opposed to 40 parents who just are holding onto the fence and not even uttering a word because they're so tense. And that's true. I've been to a million of those games.
Yeah, I bet.
I wasn't one of them, though. I had my arms folded. I don't hold on to the fence. But anyway, the reality is, if the aim is to make these kids more professional and be ready for a pro environment, that aspect of high school is much more professional training than what happens in an academy game. So let me give you one example, because I don't want to waste your time on too much. But one of the strictures that was introduced is that they created the FIFA rule. The only clubs that have the FIFA rule for substitution is the development academy. In most youth club soccer, if you get subbed out, coach can put his arm around you and say, look, you've been overlapping on the left side more than I want you to. Take the space when it's in front of you, but don't overlap every single time, because you're making recovery runs and you're putting us in jeopardy. Puts the arm around the kid's shoulder, U14, puts him back in. But in the development academy at U14, once you take a kid out, he's done. Okay? And just like in FIFA rules. And that, to me, is utterly ridiculous. It's counterproductive. The tension these kids feel, and that goes all the way up to U18 or U19, because, again, in the American system, they're not just looking to play for their academy. They've got college coaches looking at them, and they're completely tense about whether they're going to get in the game or whether they're going to be pulled. If the idea from U.S. Soccer was, we want to make sure these kids are professional, and they know they're going to get the hook if they don't have their heads in the game and start off well. So we're going to put that pressure on them so they'll get pulled, in 15 minutes and they can't go back in. Well, that could be achieved not by rule, but by coach's decision. In other words, if you pull that kid for overlapping too much, and you don't have that rule, but you said to Johnny before the game, Johnny, if you don't start well, I'm going to pull you. If you don't have your head in the game, I'm going to pull you. If you don't listen when I told you, I'm going to pull you. That coach can still do it, right? He can take him out and put him back in, or he can decide not to. But when you do it by rule, when you have these strictures that are, quote, aimed to get these kids more professional, I can't tell you how many, because I coached a lot of these kids growing up, and I can't tell you how many kids have come to me and say, hey, the Cornell coach is at this game, the Tufts coach is at this game. I don't know if I'm going to get in. These kids are petrified. And if you have 6 out of 22 development academy kids by the end of U19 who are happy in a development academy club, in my experience, that's a lot. And there's something wrong with that. So all these things aimed at professionalizing the kid's mindset. There isn't a kid around that plays serious club soccer that doesn't know the FIFA rule that once you're substituted once you're a professional, you can't go back in. That making that rule for U14 or even U18 kid here, to me, is counterproductive given the way the U.S. system and education system works. And that's just one of those rules. So I would presumptively change that. But again, I'm not going to be doing it autocratically. We'll sit around and we'll see if people agree. Maybe there'll be a counterpoint that said, no, Steve, you don't get that. Here's this. But I can tell you, I've seen enough kids that needed distance from the academy to get their joy back. And so I'm pretty sure of myself that this is one that is a mistake.
Well, it's very interesting because where Armand and I finished high school is in North Texas, and it's a very huge and massive hotbed for youth soccer, especially with the SC Dallas Academy. And the Region 2 soccer director of the high school, Fred Kaiser, who we had on the show, we discussed with him about the issues, and he said they lose quite a bit of high school players quite a bit compared to other areas of the country and even in the state to the academy, and not being able to play high school, and it feels like the high school game is almost getting, I don't know what you say, it's getting thrown off. And then what's your response to the college game? Because that's the next level. But at age 18, 19, 20, in Europe, you're making your professional debut.
Right. No, you are making a professional debut. I mean, look, there's, my son just had an amazing freshman year, and he led his school to the Division III Final Four, or helped lead, I should say, his freshman. So it was an extraordinary first year for him. But what I can say is, I'm certainly troubled by a lot in the college game. But I think one thing that's important to point out is that when I talk about adjusting for what makes America different, if you're 16 years old and you're in the Everton Academy and you're still with Everton, then you've made a decision. You're either going to be a footballer or you're going to be a tradesman. You're not going to end up going to college. And that's true in many, many places in this world. That's not true in America, right? Most kids are, if they're in the development academy, whether or not they want to be pros, they're trending to college. And that's just a fact. And that's something that makes things different here. So, for instance, when U.S. Soccer goes out and studies Belgium and says, we got to do it like Belgium. Well, in my opinion on that is, again, it's more ignorance to just wholesale institute stuff, because Belgium's 11 million population country, and they've created all these world-class players. There is a reason to study it. There's a reason to study Iceland. Okay, but what you take from it, and you apply it, modulating it for what makes America different. And one of the things that makes America different is the emphasis on education here. And you got to realize that so it would be one thing if these kids, having the pressure on them, were just playing for their academy and the pros. But what happens is they're playing for the development academy. The showcase in Sarasota for the development academy that happens in December, and otherwise, traditionally in either Indiana or Dallas. I think it's being moved now, but in the spring, those are done to it's showcase for colleges. The overwhelming number of kids are headed to college. So, for better or worse, that's the path of most players. Now, I mean, my problem with college right now. Yes, I do agree the season is short. It's not an easy fix. My problem right now is I think that the emphasis in college in America right now is much too much. In my day, certainly the players weren't as good, but in some ways I think the play was better. Right now the emphasis seems in most cases to be on athleticism and physicality and long goalkeeper punts on turf and winning those punts than it is on the technical play. And that's regrettable because this is a beautiful sport when it's played well technically.
No, absolutely, Steven. We just want to wrap up our talk on the topic of the DA and whatnot, because actually in July of last year, we actually spoke to the DA director, Jared Mikolas, and we straight up asked him if the DA was there to develop American players or just soccer players, and he said it was their job to develop soccer players with the hope that they represent the red, white, and blue. Do you see this as an issue at all with the funding that they receive from the USSF?
You mean the Development Academy is developing players for the U.S. national team, right?
Yes, but when we spoke with Jared Mikolas, he said it was to develop soccer players with the hope that they represent the red, white, and blue. Right,
and so I suppose that means if a kid is of dual citizenship or not, that kid would be able to play somewhere else, like for Mexico or something like
Correct.
that. Is that what you mean?
Correct. Yeah.
I certainly, excuse me, I have a cold. Certainly wouldn't want a kid who is from a meritocratic basis good enough to, make a development academy team who still has the ability to play somewhere else, to exclude him. I think that would be discriminatory. For instance, if you look here in Boston, Diego Fagundes, who I believe his family's from Uruguay, correct me if I'm wrong, he was with my Boston Bolts, and then he went to the Revolution, And then at a certain point, he, and obviously he was developed through the DA for